Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Avatar Weekly discussion topic video. This week's video I'm going to be talking about Azula and basically my thoughts on her actions in Smoke and Shadow Part 3 and kind of where I think her arc is going as we expect the next Avatar comic series to focus on Azula and really kind of cover her as a character and potentially lead us to whatever it is the fate of Azula is actually going to be. So, let's jump straight in. Azula, I think, is probably the most important kind of lingering plot point, plot thread, character arc in the comics at the moment. Yes, there are things that we want to see. We want to see a lot of the relationship stuff happen. We want to see Mai and Zuko get back together. We want to see more Sokka and Suki. We want to see Katara and Aang, their relationship develop much further, see more moments. That's all really cool, but it's not really plot. The main overall world building plot would obviously be get to the point where the idea of United Republic as the United Republic as we kind of know it properly comes up. That's what we're kind of expecting that to be. But other than that, the big plot point is indeed Azula. We all thought at the start of Smoke and Shadow that potentially that was going to be the book where we got the full-on resolution for Azula and where her character is going. Turns out that was more of just a reintroduction back into the story after not seeing her in the Rift, after what happened at the end of the Search. And it was a kind of a bit of a tease in that sense, and that there was some really good stuff in Smoke and Shadow Part 3 with Azula and her interactions with Zuko and kind of the way she's different now. But it still speaks to the fact that she still isn't really developed. I don't think Azula just stays like this all the way up until whenever she dies, potentially leading into Korra or anything like that. I think there is much more of a story there. I think the fact that they teased Azula's arc in Smoke and Shadow but didn't commit to it highlights the fact that there has to be a bigger arc for her at some point within the comics. That they wouldn't be teasing this arc in The Search, in Smoke and Shadow, if there wasn't a plan for her to really have a big character arc. That in many ways, Azula is the new Zuko. Azula is currently going through a similar type of arc to the arc that Zuko went on in ATLA, the show. She is the one who is now confused, whereas it's the reverse of where she was throughout most of the show. Azula was the really confident one, knew exactly what she wanted and the exact way to do it. Zuko was the one who was so confused, conflicted, no idea what to do. He was the one in need of advice. Now, he's gotten past most of his problems, and Azula actually has her own issues that she still needs to deal with. So, they're in an interesting spot here as we obviously are getting towards the end of North and South, and we're waiting for whatever the next Avatar comic announcement is. And I think most people want it to be the Azula thing, and they want to see some sort of a resolution. Now, I'll touch on where I think her arc is going overall, but I do want to analyze her stuff in Smoke and Shadow Part 3, where it needs to go, what they need to cover, before we get to the actual resolution of what direction is Azula going to take as a character. Because obviously we know that based on the way we see Zuko in, and just the way the Fire Nation seems to be in Korra, it doesn't seem like Azula had this huge effect that changed everything. It doesn't really feel like Zuko has gone through all this stuff with Azula, and that Azula is just this disaster, this tragedy that happened within the Fire Nation family. It seems that whatever happens with Azula eventually comes to a resolution where it is not just this. She wasn't just always this kind of hassle for Zuko. That where she is at the end of Smoke and Shadow Part 3, basically planning with the Kimura Kage to cause all this chaos in the Fire Nation to try and make Zuko a better Fire Lord, that doesn't persist for long enough that it just informs everything about Zuko's reign as Fire Lord. So, let's actually get into the stuff in Smoke and Shadow Part 3. I think the main stuff to talk about with regards to the impact on her character is definitely the stuff when she's actually talking to Zuko right towards the end. And everyone points out the fact that what she says here, hello dear brother, any idea whose crypt we're in? It belongs to the first Fire Lord's most trusted advisor. Rather fancy, isn't it? So, straight away, this plus what she later says speaks to where she sees herself and the role she wants to play within the Fire Nation royalty, that she wants to be that advisor. That she has found out the kind of history behind the first Fire Lord's most trusted advisor, and kind of accepts that I'm never going to be Fire Lord. That's Zuko's destiny, but my destiny is potentially to be the advisor to the Fire Lord. That I could make that title of Fire Lord's advisor meaningful again. That maybe I won't be remembered, I'll be forgotten, kind of like this guy was. But at least I will have had an impact on the Fire Lord in terms of shaping him into the person that he needs to be. That is kind of what Azula's aim here is, what she thinks that she's doing for Zuko here. That in basically forcing these situations where Zuko has to act in a certain way to resolve them, she thinks she is making him a better kind of person. Now, could you say that she's actually being an advisor to him? Not necessarily. Because I think the fundamental problem that they don't tackle here, and that needs to be brought up, is that Azula isn't really the best person to take advice from, in the sense of she still believes that controlling people through fear is the best way to go about things. The only breakthrough that she's really had is that she's accepted that she's not going to be the Fire Lord. That's the key thing. We don't know why or how she came to that conclusion, that is not what she's meant for, and that she is meant to just kind of assist Zuko in some way. That we do need to see. I think when we catch up with Azula next, we probably need focus on her alone. We need to flash back to how she came to form the Khmer Kage, where she went after the end of the search, and how she kind of cleared her head to the point where she's clearer and stronger in Smoke and Shadow Part 3. So that's I think the kind of big thing at the start of that book that they need to do. They need to tackle that and address the fact that that's the only real conclusion that she's come to. She's clearer because she now has a focus. Instead of focusing on, I need to defame Zuko so that he's not part of the family to make Ozai the Fire Lord again, she's set in stone that no, Ozai's not meant to be Fire Lord, I'm not meant to be Fire Lord, Zuko's Fire Lord, I'll accept that, but I can still have an impact on him and change him in some way to be more like the Fire Lord I think that we actually need. So it's just her sense of what she feels her destiny is has kind of slightly shifted. The problem with Azula has always been her approach. That controlling people through fear has always been the way that she goes about doing things, and the way she thinks that it's actually needed. In that the whole reason she basically goes about things with the whole Khmer Kage plot is that she says, recently I found out the Khmer Kage are dark spirits of legend born of fear and anger and revenge, my kind of ladies. So she takes on the role of these Khmer Kage, who are actual real spirits, because they to some extent had power because of the fear that they instilled in people, and she feels that that is the best way to go about things. That I don't think Azula can ever be an effective advisor to Zuko until she realizes the error in thinking that way, that controlling people through fear is the only way to do things. Because yes, you can make the point that Zuko is perhaps a little bit too idealistic in thinking that he can just be like happy, peacetime, tea time basically all the time, like Iroh. That to some extent, as the leader, he's going to have to make some harsh decisions. And we've seen that. We see that ultimately in The Promise, the whole point of that book in the end was that Zuko made a tough decision, thought that, oh, am I doing it again where I'm making the wrong decision, Aang must be right, when in fact Zuko was actually correct the entire time, and just put himself through so much because he doubted himself. Whereas he actually, at this point, is developed enough to where he can make those decisions and they're right, at least the majority of the time they're actually correct. So, like, Zuko, I think, is kind of past the doubt over his, like, will he make the right choices or not. He's always going to struggle with that. I think that's always going to be something with Zuko, that he's not the most kind of, like, perfect person for making those tough decisions, but he's developed enough now that I feel he can make those decisions without just completely, like, hurting himself the entire time. Whereas, like, Azula, again, it comes back to she doesn't realize that there's another way to do things other than controlling people through fear. That, yes, I think ultimately maybe Zuko does need an advisor who maybe doesn't see things as, like, clear, idealistic, that, like, we can solve everything through peace and talking. That maybe a more calm, focused Azula who perhaps understands more of Zuko's approach could be an effective advisor to Zuko. And I think in many ways, if they go down that road of having Azula talk to Ursa, learn more about her new sister, Ki, talk to perhaps Noran, talk to Ursa, as I said, Zuko more. If she comes to accept the fact that what she's missing is understanding what it means to have friends and be close to people, care about them because they're your friends. I suppose the idea of just kind of the idea that you care about people and you can basically have an influence on them, not because of fear or control, but because you kind of understand them and they trust you. That just by being friendly with people, caring about them, loving them, that you can actually kind of have some form of an influence on them that way. That's what she doesn't get. Does Azula know what it means to be loved or love someone? To some extent, she does, because you can tell deep down that she is hurt by the fact that she feels her mother doesn't love her, but knows deep down that her mother did tell her that she loves her, but can't come to accept that because of various events in the past and her thinking that her mother feels a certain way about her. So there's a lot of little things like that, and I think in many ways it will have to come down to, I think, Ursa talking to Azula and basically saying, Azula, think about it. The entire time after I left, when you were with your father, with Zuko alone, did Ozai ever properly care about you? Did he ever, tell you that he loves you? Or was it always training how to become a better assistant to me, to help me become more powerful in the Fire Nation, gain control in the war? Did he only treat you like a tool, or did he actually treat you like a daughter? I think pointing at stuff like that, given what Ursa actually says to Ozai at the end, I think that's what perhaps we're going to come down to. Just even though Azula seems like she's kind of past the idea of caring massively about Ozai, I think Ursa pointing out a lot of this to Azula about Ozai will help her to realize that her approach comes from the fact that Ozai only raised her as kind of a weapon of war type thing, that he didn't really help her to develop as a person and kind of understand people's feelings and stuff like that. And you can see what she says to Ozai, and how in many ways it also applies to Azula. After all these years, I finally see you, Ozai. You're just a small man trying with all your might to be big. Your heart is so small, you've no room for your son or your daughter or your brother or even yourself. So this is the idea that she's basically saying, Ozai, you don't have a heart. You don't understand what it is to love your family. The same applies to Azula, but I don't think it's necessarily because Azula just doesn't care. I think it's in a way that because Azula has never been thought to kind of care in a way. I think with Azula, it's always one of those kind of tough lines to kind of straddle about, should you be overly sympathetic towards Azula and kind of absolve her of a lot of what she's done because of the way she was raised, or accept the fact that to some extent Azula as a person was always like that. She was always kind of, cold, calculating, never massively focused on that emotional side that perhaps Zuko has, and that it was always going to be a struggle for her to kind of learn that emotional kind of connection style stuff, whereas the cold, calculating control through fear came to her easily, and the way she was raised just completely emphasized that more. I think it's probably a mix of the two, that she was probably going to turn out a little bit like that, but if the family had stuck together, Ursa had a bigger influence on Azula's life, then maybe things would have gone a little bit differently. Azula wouldn't be as kind of out there as she is right now, and so on. So I think a lot of the ways, as I said, I think ultimately that's the direction they have to take Azula in. They have to get Azula to a point where, whether it be Iroh, Ursa, maybe using Kigi to some degree, Zuko, Noran even, I think they could use Noran quite effectively as a father figure who could come into her life and actually act like a real father to her. I'd like to see Norin used a little bit more. Just one of those characters, or maybe a combination of those characters, highlight to her that control through fear is not the way to go about things, and understand that she has the potential to have all of these important relationships, in terms of like, she has a family who does care for her if she let them do that and wasn't always trying to kind of get the one up or control people. She has the potential to have friends, and in the past was close to like Mei and Ty Lee, but the way she treated them as she grew up, as she focused more and more on controlling people through fear, she really didn't act like a friend to them and more just controlled them. That I do think there was a friendship between Mei, Ty Lee, and Azula. It just, as Azula kind of grew up, it really did kind of fall apart, and it became more of Azula leading those two and kind of controlling them, influencing them. So, there's a lot of characters that Azula is somewhat close to in some ways that could really point this stuff out to her. It's all about, I think, executing the moment of how you finally have Azula come to some degree, accept that control through fear doesn't work. That has to be the big moment with Azula. Her accepting that doesn't work, and I think more so than the breakdown moment that happens after Mei and Ty Lee's betrayal. That was the big moment of that shattering of the control through fear doesn't work. That there has to be a moment where it's not, I don't know what to do now, it turns more into Azula's actual emotions on the matter. That maybe she does have a little bit more of a breakdown, but more in terms of like an emotional, maybe crying sense. And I think this could be the moment where she talks to Ursa. I think her finally realizing that control through fear doesn't work, and maybe Ursa being there to somewhat comfort her, could be the way to go about doing that, and kind of end the book in a way where Azula is maybe on the right track and willing to give up the whole messing around with the Fire Nation to create Zuko into someone who she thinks he needs to be, and more kind of like, okay, it's going to take time, but we're going to try and incorporate Azula into the family and touch in with her as the comics progress, and kind of see her trying, whether that be interactions with Ki, interacting with Mei and Ty Lee, maybe visiting her, depending on how exactly they go about approaching what her mental state is after this kind of big realization. Maybe to some degree the people in the mental institution that she is friends with now, maybe they are actual close friends, that they actually understand her and get her, and that actually could be an interesting kind of support group to have around Azula. I don't know, they still need to develop that whole thing. And I think that's potentially a direction to take her in as a character. After that, I think if you are going to have just Azula, like, after a certain amount of time, just kind of be a character, she's past most of her problems, I actually think putting her in a role where she somewhat is a advisor to Zuko as the Fire Lord is the right way to go, because the skills that Azula does have, when you take away the like villainous kind of angle that she tends to have with most of this stuff, I think she is like a somewhat cunning kind of military tactician. She's extremely intelligent in terms of political matters and how to manipulate things to get what she wants. If she did that with the kind of more good angle on things that Zuko has, kind of ultimately making the decision, I think it would turn the potential weakness of Zuko as a leader, as maybe being overly idealistic, into being an exceptionally strong leader, because he would have someone who is more cold and calculating there helping him make those decisions. I think gradually morphing Azula into that character could be the interesting way to go, and maybe in the end have Azula properly remembered as, at the end of her life, a very important advisor to the Fire Lord. That after this point, Zuko realizes that the Fire Lords are always remembered, but the advisors aren't. And for the first time, he has like Azula maybe remembered just as much as the Fire Lord for her help in terms of these matters. Something like that, I think, as like an overarching thing for Azula as a character, should potentially be the way they take her going forward. like, obviously there's some other stuff going on after Smoke and Shadow, and that, like, Kalo is out there, and, like, there's some speculation around the fact that maybe Kalo could join up with Azula, and then, like, you'd have this thing of, like, she's trying to get one over on May by having Kalo side with her, and that be some sort of emotional manipulation against May. I'm not really sure, though, what sort of an angle they really would approach taking with that. But I suppose the other thing I want to talk about here is just right where we are at the end of Smoke and Shadow. Is Azula going to have an impact on Zuko? What she says to him, the whole idea of, like, in the last 24 hours, I've shown just how ruthless you can be. Deep down inside, you're still one of us. You can deny it for a little while, but eventually you will become just like me, and then in a sense, I'll be Fire Lord again. Is that true? Is she actually having an impact? Or is that just a sense of Azula still not getting it coming out here? Because I think there are some people who are honestly, like, believing, after Smoke and Shadow, their interpretation of it is that Azula is actually really honestly helping Zuko with what she's doing here. That forcing him to be somewhat ruthless is actually a good thing. Whereas, to me, it's more of one of those things where it just highlights Azula's kind of that she's still not fully right, that there's still an element of craziness to her, that, yeah, Zuko was a little bit, like, I wouldn't say ruthless, I don't think, but, like, he was making some tough decisions, and he was not, like, overly pondering them all that much. He was being a little bit forceful in some of his decisions, and they maybe came across as harsh. I suppose harsh would be the word I'd say, rather than ruthless. But I really don't think Azula is going to have such an influence here with what she's doing, that Zuko is suddenly going to be questioning everything he's gone through in ATLA, in the comics up to now, that he'll be questioning, like, oh, am I going to go evil again? Am I becoming like my father again? I really think we're long past that with Zuko as a character. He may have had some doubt at the moment just because of, like, Azula being right there and being more powerful and stuff like that, but I think when it really comes down to it, like, I don't think she's having an impact. I think what her dialogue more points out the fact that you still don't get it. You don't get the reason why Zuko's not going to be like that. That the reason Zuko's not going to become like that is because that is not the right way for the Fire Lord to be. That until she realizes that the leader of the Fire Nation at this point of time in an era of peace, that the leader of the Fire Nation does not need to control people through fear. Until she gets to that point, she won't have an impact on Zuko. And I'd like to see that become the switch. That I think at the end of this book, Azula's like, okay, Zuko's made this speech, he's trying to be better, but I'll get him eventually. I think that's my interpretation of, at the end of this book, her expression as she watches his speech. That it's kind of it's kind of like you're stalling for the inevitable. This idea that you may doubt it for a little while, but eventually you'll become just like that. Like her interpretation of his speech is that, okay, for now, you're gonna act like the Fire Lord you think you want to be, but eventually you'll become the ruthless Fire Lord you need to be. Whereas I think, whenever we catch up with Azula again, I think we're going to see Azula be the frustrated one. That she's going to be doing all this stuff, Zuko's going to be making decisions to kind of stop all of the stuff that she's doing from having too big of an impact, and the people are going to be getting more and more behind Zuko, and not accepting him as a Fire Lord, a reasonable Fire Lord, and they'll be realizing that it's just Azula as the one who's causing havoc around the Fire Nation, rather than Zuko making tough decisions. That Azula is the one with the problem, not Zuko. I really do think that is the way they're going with this. That Azula is going to get to the point where, like, why am I not having an impact on Zuko? Why is he not changing? It's been so long, we've done all this stuff to the Fire Nation, and he hasn't shown the signs of cracking and becoming the ruthless Fire Lord, controlling people through fear. And how she reacts to that is going to be the key thing. But again, I don't really know when they're going to make this decision. We don't even know when the next Avatar comic is going to be announced. And I think the fact that her plot is just so big, there's still, like, the majority of her arc in terms of changing her as a character, the fact that that's still to come, I think that is the big hope for the fact that Avatar comics will continue. Obviously, core comics are throwing up a lot of questions that we don't have the answers to just yet about where exactly are things going. I think at some point, maybe if we're going to have a delay between the end of North and South and the next Avatar comic, but at some point we will get the next Avatar comic, and I think it has to be Azula focused. Not just another Smoke and Shadow where like it'll be Zuko and May, and then Azula is gradually brought in. I think you actually have to have the story focus a lot on Azula, like kind of like in the way of The Search was focused on Ursa, and then Azula was kind of there as a kind of secondary main character. I think you just have to kind of reverse that a little bit, where like Azula's the main character, and then like Zuko, Ursa, and so on are like the other main important key characters. But yeah, I'm going to end the video there. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Azula as a character. Based on the end of Smoke and Shadow Part 3, where do you think she's going as a character? What's the direction you think they will actually take her as a character? Do you think what she's done to Zuko is going to change him? Or does it just point out the fact that she is the one who still actually needs to change herself? Just all of these sort of questions about where you think they're going to go with Azula as a character. Do you think she will have a somewhat tragic ending? Will they finally like commit to doing something very tragic with the character here? Or will there be somewhat of a redemptive arc for her? So discuss that in the comments below, and I'll be sure to give my own thoughts on whatever you guys say. But for now, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.